Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. We will get started here in, I don't know, 13 seconds precisely. Actually, I'm not really keeping track. So uh, it'll be somewhere around there as we let people kind of trickle in, and we'll get to introduce Michelle and what our topic's going to be today. So we'll kind of give a little bit more time. Hopefully everyone's having a lovely Tuesday afternoon or evening or morning. I don't know, depends on where you're joining from. um, cool. All right, let's get into it. Welcome everybody to the Fullcast Fireside Chat. I'm your host, Tyler Simons. I am the head of customer success at Fullcast, and we are, surprise, surprise, a go-to-market planning and execution platform. If you want to know more about that, you can go to fullcast.io. Today, though, more importantly, we're going to be talking a little bit about the partnership between revenue operations and sales leadership. And really, how do we become that indispensable business advisor? And because I know nothing, we're bringing Michelle Kim on, who is the director of sales strategy and operations at Zendesk, and she's going to impart her wisdom on this topic. Michelle, why don't you give us a little update on what you're up to?
Sure. Thanks, Tyler, for having me, and I'll try my best. It's just some of my little learnings here and there. Yeah, I'm Michelle Kim, so I'm currently Director of Sales Strategy and Operations at Zendesk. If you don't know, Zendesk is a customer support solution. It's amazing. It's wonderful, and I've been here for almost 4 years and have had two promotions in that time. And prior to Zendesk, if you just want a quick recap of my life story in terms of the professional aspect,
Yeah.
I've done SaaS sales, I've done marketing, I've done program management, I did CS, customer success operations, for about 5 years. So yeah, I've just been in tech for most of my professional career, and in addition to the normal work stuff, I recently launched a podcast called Breaking the Tech Ceiling, where I interview VP and C-level women in go-to-market roles such as sales, marketing, operations, product. So I'm really passionate about, elevating other women in tech, and also personally just learning from them, right? Trying to decide if that executive career path is for me, and figuring out even more ways to become an indispensable business advisor while I'm still in my current role.
If we wanted to go find that podcast, do you have like a website for that or LinkedIn or what's
Yeah,
the?
it's www.breakingthetechceiling.com. It's also on Apple, it's also on Spotify, and I think
Yeah.
Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you go to my LinkedIn, there's a lot of Michelle Kims out there, but if you look up Michelle Kim Zendesk, like I'll show
Type
up.
in the best Michelle Kim, and then you're
I
gonna.
don't know about the best. There are a lot of really good
I'm
Michelle
kidding.
Kims out there. I know like four of them.
Yeah, yeah. Great. So everyone knows where to find that. So let's talk a little bit about, what's interesting about this topic today is that, a lot of times revenue operations people report into the head of revenue operations, who reports into either a CRO, CFO. That's different in organizations. But like when you think about like the RevOps managers, the RevOps analysts, the people that are kind of like putting these reports together, doing the territory planning, whatever the kind of the tactical, that blend between that tactical and strategic, they're actually working very, very closely with sales leadership. It's like this like dotted line reporting structure. And for the longest time, it's been this order taking type of relationship where RevOps is just coming in and, yeah, I'll build this report. But I think there's more there, right? And so what I would like to hear from you really is, just in your experience, what do you think makes like a really great working relationship between RevOps and these sales leaders?
Yeah, and I will say this goes for not just sales leaders, but all revenue related leaders. So uh, three things in my mind contribute to a really effective and healthy relationship between RevOps and whatever executive flavor you are. The first is communication, and that means determining what is my communication style, what is their communication style, how frequently do they like to be communicated with, what channels, and don't compromise either, right? Because you can't always be deferring to this executive. It's a working relationship, so being cognizant of having a mutually uh, efficient way of communicating is really critical. And maybe even more important is my second item, which is building trust. And the way to do that, in my experience, has been to have a high say and do ratio. So say you're going to do this stuff and go ahead and do it. If you break that commitment or promise, every time you do that, it erodes your trust, their trust in you. But every time you show up and do the thing you're going to do, or say you're going to do, it builds that trust. And it also displays how your competency is helping them, right? So those are the first two. And then the third, I'm going to share what a CRO said to me when I asked him, hey, what do you look for in an ops business partner? And he said two things. A, don't make me look bad. And B, make me look good. So yeah, I think those are really good foundations to have when you're trying to figure out how can I either, if it's a new job, start off on the right foot and build a good relationship, or maybe you're in a situation where you've got like a neutral or even negative relationship with your executive. How do you turn that around? So those are some ways that I recommend from my personal experience. You think about that.
I really, this might be a tangent on this, but you bring up a really interesting point of like, don't make me look bad and make me look good. And, we're kind of in this year's been super weird for tech, right?
Mhm.
And things have not been great for many companies. So how does somebody like work with leadership in the sense that like help identify these things, but where like I almost have this fear of like, well, pipeline isn't what it needs to be. I'm making this
Mhm.
example up, right? Like pipeline's way under thing. But if you really expose that, then that really does go against potentially what that CRO is saying, which is like make me look good. So how do you kind of balance that? Is that just part of this like trust and this working relationship with the leaders to say like, hey, this is what I'm seeing, these are the reports, and
Mhm.
we need to think about whatever these options and so on and so forth. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts
Yeah,
on
I
that.
mean, I think it comes down to being thoughtful. So in
Yeah.
the example that you gave, yeah, everyone's like you don't have enough pipeline. It's not necessarily exposing that leader, right? It's working together with them because they're accountable, they're responsible for their team performing or not performing. So if you are a sales leader and your AEs have a certain pipeline target and they're not hitting it, then it might be my job to help collect the information about the reps' activities so that we're demonstrating, hey, we're doing the right things, or like, giving examples of where, like, hey, product team, this is why we weren't, this gong call, right? Like, this is why we weren't able to win this deal or progress this deal. And so it's not necessarily finding excuses, but being thoughtful about, okay, it's this problem, and, these are the things that we need or that we need help to be able to be better. So I think that's one way that I go about it, because it's really easy to be like, hey, sales leader, you've got this pipeline problem, you're not performing. But that's not my job. My job is to kind of help you, right?
Yeah.
And to do that with information and data and, like putting together programs, depending on what kind of sales ops partner you are, or, RevOps partner you are. What can you do to affect change? That's part of like, I don't see sales ops as simply, or RevOps as simply the people who do the reports and analytics. I think it's going a step beyond that and figuring out, hey, like, what do we need to do to help these people be successful on the metrics that they're measured on?
And that is exactly what just like came to me while you were talking about that example. Is you were going through the examples of like, well, yeah, sure, the pipeline's bad, but like you're essentially you went further, right? You double clicked into the problem. It's not just about exposing the problem, but then also trying to identify solutions to that and paths and presenting those and working with the leadership on how to resolve that.
Yeah,
Take a step further, ask the whys. I don't know, that 5 whys always come up for
that's a
me,
good
and
one.
like,
Yeah.
and I always forget about it too, and I don't know why. I should probably just like put like a little post-it note up and just be like 5 whys. Um,
I've also kind of gotten to the habit, and I think a lot of ops people are like this. Don't come to me with a problem, to me with a solution. So I always think about what are a couple of solutions to this problem that I just uncovered, because you don't want to show up to the meeting or show up to your conversation with your exec and be like, oh, well, we saw this problem, crickets. You
yeah,
need to have some thought, like I said, be thoughtful about the way you're looking at your problems. And sometimes I have to remember, like, don't always think of the solution, or don't always have this preset idea of what the solution will be, because especially as you ascend to more senior roles, it's not always on you to solve the problem. Like, giving other people the chance to think up and come up with more creative, maybe even ways to address an issue, is not a bad thing. So I think it really depends on what level you are, but yeah, having at least some backup in mind, right? Of like, these are some ideas for how we could fix it if no one has an answer, is really helpful.
yeah, awesome. What about like the personality differences that can crop up between our leadership
Yeah.
and RevOps?
Yeah.
I'll
So I
leave it
think
at that.
generally, this, Tyler, generally RevOps professionals tend to be more analytical. They tend to be maybe more careful and more numbers oriented,
Mhm.
more interested in like process and, just getting things done. Which is why I think this world has been a good fit for me, because I am probably all of those things. And then when I think about many executives, sometimes we do have executives that are analytical, that do, want to look at the numbers. And I think as again, like as executives advance in their own careers, sales executives, CS executives, they need to know the numbers. They need to be informed. They don't have to know all the details, but they tend to be more high level, maybe more visionary in terms of how they want to execute things. And in my mind, it's their responsibility to figure out how to make their teams be successful. So those are not maybe personality differences, but a few differences that I tend to see between RevOps professionals and just even sales executives, CS executives, professional service executives. And I'm going to share a funny thing. So I recently had a journaling prompt for, how would you want to spend your perfect day? And I may seem extroverted, and extroversion is important and healthy, because I talked about communicating and building trust and doing things right. But honestly, I think I would prefer to spend a lot of my I do spend a lot of my personal time alone, because when you are working in RevOps, you need to be able to be comfortable with yourself and by yourself, and you need to set aside strategic thinking time. You need to set aside time to actually do things, right? Like, if you have to like figure out a process, use a Lucid chart or Visio, like map it out. If you have to figure out how do I get this workflow set up in Salesforce, like you can't do that necessarily with a bunch of other people in the room. It might be helpful to brainstorm, but at the end of the day, I think what I really like about working in RevOps is many of the really successful individuals that I've worked with are generally ambiverts, or I really like working with introverts that really want to grow in that area that I've gotten better at and like really good at, in terms of being more dynamic and having that sort of skill. So those are a couple of things that I see as differences between RevOps and more on the go-to-market side.
What if you have like, and this probably just goes back to your other 3 principles really, and if you have a leader that's extremely extroverted and just like the complete I wouldn't even say extroverted, just let's say like the 2 are just complete opposite worlds. Is there like any things that we can do to just try to like bridge that gap or navigate those relationships? And I think that becomes really important, right, for this collaborativeness and working. As you think about yourself as this, we're going to go back to our title, which is this indispensable business advisor. Like we have to be able to adapt and work with the different personalities that may exist.
Yeah, I'm gonna share. So I used to be in sales, right? So I was like 80%, 90%, whatever. And then I did Sandler sales training and I learned, I still practice a lot of the principles I learned from that training. Actually, I did it a few times. But one thing that I always think about is, do you know, Tyler, do you know the golden rule that many of us in the United States here learn in
Like
kindergarten?
the standard golden rule, like do unto others as others would do
Yeah,
unto
so
you.
treat others the way you want to be treated, right?
Yeah.
So in that Sandler training, I learned this idea or this principle of the platinum rule, which is to treat others the way that they want to be treated, and that really helped me reframe how I sold. And it's kind of the same too when working as a advisor, right? A business advisor, business partner. I can't always be thinking like, well, this is what I want, because at the end of the day, you have to understand their motivations, their styles, and you have to kind of come to the middle. So, you know, learn by observing, learn by asking, learn by talking to other individuals that know this person well that you're trying to build a strong relationship with. To kind of get a sense of, hey, how can I adapt my behavior to help them? And hopefully the other person is human as well and will make that effort to bridge the gap. But I'll just say, like, sometimes it's not bridgeable. So you have to hopefully realize that early,
Yeah.
and decide how you want to proceed. But yeah, I think that if you're really, really different from the person that you're supporting, I think there's a couple of ways to think about it. And yeah, you just at least try to make it a good old, what is it, college try. Give it the good old college try, like give it an effort, and see if that will change your dynamic.
I certainly was going to ask, is it weird to just ask, like, what do you what do you want? What are your expectations, etc.? Like, how do you like information? And I think you already answered it. Is like, no, it's not weird, and it's actually, if you feel like you're in the dark and you're not sure what to do, like ask.
Yeah,
And I think
so that
a lot of people would be
communication,
appreciative.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think are some of like the biggest challenges that you've seen with this and how you've maybe addressed a couple of those? I think we're really want to hear some maybe even examples I've
Yeah.
gotten it like teed up for us.
Okay, so I'll kind of look at it from two perspectives, from the perspective of working with the executive and the perspective of, just being an ops in general. So in the first use case, I'll share, I've had CS leaders, I've had sales leaders. I mentioned some people don't like to be in the weeds and the details analytical, but I've had individuals who are constantly asking for data because, it's so cool and we all want to be data driven. But the reality is, I think many organizations are more data informed, and that may change with the advent of, or more prominence um, of AI and, some of these more advanced technologies. But that's a challenge I see where, what you said at the very beginning of this call, right? Like, are we order takers or are we here to add value? And I
Yeah.
think if you are just giving people exactly what they're asking for, you're missing an opportunity because someone explained this to me once. Like, if someone asks you to build a square for them, and you drill down and ask more questions, you might uncover that they don't need a square, they need a circle. So if you're just kind of that order taker and someone's asking for data or a report, ask why and be able to discern. This is where you'll be considered next level, right? You can either provide the information as requested, or you can ask qualifying questions, right back to like kind of the sales experience. Ask the qualifying questions, do some discovery, and not all executives want to go into pivot tables and click on the different Tableau filters that you need to get to a certain output in your graph for your dashboard. So being able to come to your executive with you've discerned what are the patterns, what are the interesting insights and trends, and back to that idea of coming with a solution or coming with some insights or recommendations. That's one way to overcome someone who might just constantly be asking you for data. And this goes back to the communication and building the trust. And if you can demonstrate many times that you can do this and provide value so that it's more valuable for them to trust you to do that work and then debrief with them rather than them getting the data set and being overwhelmed and probably not even using it. It will reduce frustration, I think, on both sides. And, who wants that frustrating dynamic of like, well, he asked for this and I gave it to him, but like he didn't even use it. That was kind of like the feelings I had sometimes, maybe earlier in my career. So on the executive side, like dealing with executives, that's kind of a challenge that's how I've kind of addressed that specific challenge. And yeah, I can answer your question, or I can dive into my other kind of.
Yeah, let's do that because there's like a bonus thing that I wrote around just like talking about anticipation piece, and we'll come back to that because I think it's kind of an interesting thread there. But I want to hear your other example before I like
Yeah,
sideline up a little more.
no worries. I love it. So I want to battle this like too tactical comment because I don't know
Yeah.
how many webinar like titles and podcast episode titles that I've seen where it's like, how do you go from being tactical to strategic? And a lot of it is just like perception is reality. And so kind of one way to think about it is, how detail oriented am I when I'm communicating to my executive? Because I think what gets lost is, um, I don't know if there are people who know what these kitchen gadgets are, but there's the idea of a colander and the idea of a sieve. And a colander is like when you're draining pasta, there's like a lot of stuff we'll get through, and a sieve is much more dense, right? And so there's going to be less stuff that gets through. So you have to think of yourself as someone who can be a sieve rather than a colander, because you don't want to just be completely unfiltered when you're sharing information with your leaders. It has to be relevant and important to them, and you have to use that judgment to determine what will be relevant and what will be important to them. And I kind of I'll again like share a little bit something a little bit more personal piece to this, because I mentioned that I am quite detail oriented, and this is a good and common trait among RevOps professionals. But I found that the reason that I was being so detail oriented was because I was experiencing a flavor of imposter syndrome. And so there are many different types of imposter syndrome. And I actually don't like imposter syndrome. Originally it was called the imposter phenomenon,
Mhm.
because it's external factors kind of making you feel this way rather than like, oh, this is something intrinsically like a syndrome wrong with me, right? But the one that I experienced was like the imposter of feeling like I'm not enough of an expert. And I in high school, I don't know if it was one of the philosophers like Socrates or Plato or Aristotle who said, "The more you know, the less you know." And that's exactly how I feel. I'm like, oh, I know so much about this business that I'm very specific about like that specific win rate or pipeline coverage, or and sometimes executives they're just trying to like, one of the reasons I think that the RevOps function came to fruition is because they want to do what they're good at. They might not care as much about the numbers or like the how, or the back office stuff. And so I think that's a challenge that I see when I mentor or coach other individuals in the RevOps space, right? It's like, oh, I'm not getting promoted because they think I'm too tactical or they don't think I'm strategic enough. And I think that you change that perception by being, again, like thoughtful and thinking before you speak, preparing before you present, anticipating objections. So those are all things that I think that can help, or that have helped me in battling this perception of like, oh, she's too tactical. And maybe it still exists because I am super detail oriented, but it's one thing that can help combat that.
But what's interesting about this is like we do there is that talk track, right? About tactical, get to strategic, but like that's kind of why RevOps became RevOps is
Mhm.
because you and I and everyone else love to get into the weeds, right? Like we just love to be tactical. And I think you're really hitting on something super important. And I wrote this down and just kind of as I was going through the flow and, doing research here is like this anticipation of what a sales leader sorry, you've been doing a great job of like, it's not just sales leader, it's CS leader, marketing leader, whatever, leader you're talking with. So anticipate what this leader may like decisions that they may need to make, right? So we go back to this very carte blanche, like this pipeline example that I came up with. And yeah, you're like, okay, yeah, so the pipeline's bad. So again, going back to why, but let's see about these decisions that may need to be made. And we need to go dive further into that, which is the tactical piece, but things that, you can help the leader uh, be informed on and make decisions with. And I think that that kind of starts to bridge that gap. And you kind of move from this tactical to strategic, but I don't know that the tactical slash detail oriented slash getting in the weeds ever goes away for us.
No, I mean, I don't think it ever will for me. That's just my DNA. But yeah, I mean, it's all where do you want to live, right? Because if you're happy being in the weeds, you're happy in the day-to-day, building the workflows like the process builders, maybe you stay as an analyst, senior analyst, and just that's where you want to live. And as you progress in your career, as with any other function, when you progress to like senior manager, director, VP, SVP, C level, you do have to start thinking about the bigger picture, and that's where you start to do less on your own, maybe, or maybe you still do it, but you have to start being able to talk to a different level, and at a different level.
That makes sense. So I think we got a couple minutes left and we wanted to just round out our conversation here with, I guess, top tips. But really just some of these key takeaways really from our conversation on just how can we build stronger and of course more strategic relationships with our leaders.
Yeah, so I said those three things, right? Communication, building trust, and don't make them look bad, make them look good. It's going to come down to that, but I'll be very specific with very tactical, actionable, hopefully, things that you can do. So tip number one is at the end of the day, please, be competent. I don't know how many RevOps leaders I've met that I'm just like, oh wow, you don't have any understanding of how the business works. And that's alarming to me. To be an indispensable business advisor, you have to know your stuff, right? So I think if you are someone who feels that, like I said, the kind of the imposter phenomenon, check yourself. Like if you start talking to people and you really have no idea what they're talking about, then yeah, maybe you need to go back and do some homework, or classes, or just courses or whatever. But the baseline is you need to be competent to be an indispensable business advisor, right? So be good at executing, be good at having and maintaining that high say do ratio. So I know that's going to sound really harsh, but and kind of a weird way to judge. Like it's hard to judge, right? Like how do I know if I'm good at my job? You'll know if you're not good at your job, hopefully. And if you care enough to improve, like there's a cornucopia of ways you can address that and fix that. So that's number one. Build your competencies, and always be building your competencies. And number two is to listen. And you might think like, oh, listen to my executives. Yeah, that's a no-brainer. But I would say as you build your competency, start listening to yourself, your own judgment, and what you perceive as the best course of action, or the best go-to-market strategy, or the best way to handle a situation. And most importantly, again, as you become less entrenched in working with the other ops people in your organization and you ascend to different levels of your career, learn to listen to everyone in your work ecosystem, right? Because when you walk into a meeting room where it's a bunch of different people from a lot of different departments, it goes back to like, how can I make sure that my leader doesn't look bad and that they look good? You're collecting data points. And on the flip side, you're building those relationships, developing your emotional intelligence. On the flip side, hopefully you're in a situation where you can have a reciprocal relationship with your executive, because you're their eyes and ears on the ground in rooms that they can't be in, right? And so, if you're constantly looking out for them, they're not really doing the same for you. It's a little bit of a challenge, but the only way you can really develop the perception right on your side, the only thing that you can control on your side is to become a better listener. And I try to work on that. It's not, um, like I said earlier, when I have these ideas of this is how I want to do it, like I have to take a step back and try to give people time to react, to pause, to give their 2 cents, and to have them process and digest a problem that I might have been thinking about for like hours and they are just exposed to it. So yeah,
Yep.
those are my 2 tips. Just build your competencies in the areas that you want to become competent in, and just be a really good listener.
Yep. Don't make me look bad. Make me look good.
Yeah.
I love it. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us on the Fireside Chat today. And thank you all for coming on and checking us out. And
Yeah.
again, what was the podcast again?
Oh, it's called Breaking the Tech Ceiling, and just
All right.
it goes specifically into how do you go from like a director, senior director to VP, or go from VP to C-level, because I am the ICP for that podcast, because I looked for podcasts where I could kind of hear that to discern and determine whether I wanted to try and pursue that path for myself. And
Yeah.
since it didn't exist, I just thought like, well, I've already interviewed like 100 of these women. Let me see if I can get some of the interesting, career path people with interesting career paths to share their experiences in a podcast. So it's a really good experience, and I've really learned a lot, and hope people get a good value out of it as well.
Love it. All right, Michelle. Thank you so much. And until next time, I got to come up with a better outro, but that's all I
Until
got.
next time. Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks,
See you,
everyone.
everyone.